Awesome. So this will be recorded and the recording should hit your inbox hopefully 24 to 48 hours after the recording has been completed. That way, so you guys just know when to expect. You all are here. So that means that you found us in your inbox, which is awesome. And you also found the correct link, which I appreciate. So welcome. We are here to discuss Exhausted to Energized. And we are GRAZE, Growing Resiliency for Aquarium and Zoo Employees. And there are 3 of us that make up this organization, myself, Shannon McKenney, my colleagues, Erin McNally and Hannah Fulmer. Between the 3 of us, we have roughly 40 years of zoo and aquarium and animal care experience and knowledge. We have all held various different positions in different organizations and have had different responsibilities throughout those years. We are all also trained in critical incident stress management response, and we work with our clinical director and licensed clinical social worker and compassion fatigue therapist, Cynthia Kronsky. Because I have so much content to go over with you all today, I wanted to make sure that you guys get as much information as possible in the short time that we are together. If you want to know more about who we are, you can check us out on our website, and we do have all that information at the end. But I really want to spend most of today's conversation on the content regarding exhaustion and how we can support ourselves. The main mission of GRAZE is to bring awareness, bring tools and strategies, resources, and support to animal care professionals and our industry as a whole. So whether that's individuals, organizations, or just the industry in any way, shape, or form, that's really what we're trying to achieve here. So let us dive in deep into our conversation today. So right off the bat, we're going to practice our chat skills. So I would love for you to throw in the chat, and Erin and Hannah are going to be helping me with the technical side of things. But I want to know who here has ever felt or currently feels exhausted, and maybe a few words to describe what did that feel like, or what does exhaustion mean or feel like to you? So
I have brain fog, becoming numb, worn down, not motivated, unfocused, chaotic, an empty balloon, exhausted since 2002, tired, can't think, brain fog, inability to focus, unmotivated, feeling helpless, overwhelmed, short fuse, depression. Currently feel exhausted, kind of feels like burning the candles at both ends. Again, brain fog, inability to focus, no motivation, low energy, tired constantly, stuck in a cycle, stressed and tired, unmotivated, sleepy, carrying a weight. So quite a bit.
Yes. And as you can see, everyone, or at least anyone who chatted, there's a description, there's a yes, I have felt this way. And you're not alone, and the statistics support that. One of the biggest things we want to always get awareness out there is that when you're going through hard times, chances are you're not alone in how you feel and what you're experiencing. While those experiences and feelings are very unique to you, you're not alone. And that can be really important. So I'm just going to take a brief moment to look at some of the statistics. And these are studies that have happened after. A lot of the studies that happened before the pandemic, there were still high numbers, but we're definitely now seeing even higher numbers. So SHRM is one of the organizations that does human resource management. They found that almost half of all US workers feel mentally and physically exhausted. And of those, 41% are more specific in feeling burnt out. Another study with the American Psychological Association found that of those who are feeling mentally, physically exhausted, they report feeling decrease in energy, cognitive weariness, emotional exhaustion, and physical fatigue. A lot of the things that you all just put into the chat. Now, if we want to break that down further, I'm someone, I kind of like statistics, so I'm going to give you just a few more, but then I promise we'll be done and we'll get into the information. But when we look at how that's broken out, Now, mind you, this is just for, this survey did only identify those who identify as either male or female. It didn't address gender fluidity. And so you can still see that the over half of individuals, regardless of your identification, do tend to feel burnt out. Also generationally, because I think this is really interesting. Sometimes we tend to have the stereotype that one generation is more impacted than the other. And you can see kind of across the board, all the generations are impacted by exhaustion in some manner of speaking. And so I think that's really important when we think about exhaustion and that it is a real issue. Now, the reason that we're focusing on exhaustion today is May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and exhaustion does impact our overall mental health. And so I thought that this is a really important topic to bring up. Plus, as many of you noted in the chat, we all have or are currently feeling that way. Some of us for much longer. When we define what exhaustion is for the purposes of today's content, it's really defined as a state of extreme physical or mental fatigue. It is the action or the state of using something up or being used up completely. So that's kind of the definition that we're going to operate. And I really want to break it down into 3 categories. So the 3 categories that I'm going to focus on today are physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and emotional exhaustion. And what I want to do in each one of these topics is to briefly explore what is the definition of that. What are some of the symptoms that you could recognize either in yourself or others? And what are some of the causes? Because when we can understand the symptoms and the causes, then when we get to the tool portion of today's conversation, we can see how those tools might relate or impact us, okay? So let's talk about physical exhaustion. We're going to define this as a lingering tiredness that is constant and limiting. And how we can recognize feeling physically exhausted. I mean, most of us probably, when we hear that, have an idea, but I just want to list some of the symptoms that we can look out for. So chronic lethargy, headaches and migraines, sore or achy muscles. Even slow reflex responses can be an indication of physical exhaustion. Maybe shortness of breath. Digestive issues, and we don't always think about that, but when your body is tired and has used up its reserves and its energy, then it can't focus on some of the other systems that are running kind of in the background. So our digestive system or even our immune system can be greatly impacted when we're tired and exhausted. We can also have noticed findings where dizziness and vertigo show up in those who are physically exhausted. So, you know, if these are things that you are experiencing, that can be an indication to you. And if you experience more of these or for long periods of time, then that's where we can see completely manageable tasks seem to be impossible, tedious, and maybe even difficult to complete. All right, it's that for me, really the pivotal for me when we talk about physical exhaustion is when I've had a really hard week or a really hard day. And one of the facilities that I worked at, there was a hill. There's always a hill up to the parking lot, right? We can't have the hill go down. So it goes up. And at the end of the day, when you've had one of those days where maybe things did not go right, maybe there was an animal emergency that happened, you know, just one thing after another. And that walk up that hill seemed almost impossible on those days. It was just so much. And even though it was a hill that I climbed multiple times during that day, do it constantly, for that day, it was just too much. Those tasks that we do all the time. So what causes physical exhaustion? Some things that can impact it are long hours. I'm in the northern part of the United States right now. And so many organizations that we work with and that I've worked with are going into their busy season. And so team members are working extended hours. Maybe there are all kinds of special events going on. And so now instead of working an 8-hour day, there's a 10 or 14-hour day. Or if there's a medical emergency that happens, because I know in my experience, it always feels like it happens at the end of the day. Somebody comes off their yard, or there's a tiff in the transfer chutes to get from the yard to the overnight holding facility, and there's an injury. And so now you're there longer trying to support this animal and support them through whatever the trauma they experienced was. And that can make for a really long day. Do that long enough and it starts to wear on you. Also, tedious, repetitive, or strenuous activity. Throwing a couple hundred bales of hay, that wears you out. Doing it constantly will really start to get to you, especially if you're already exhausted in other ways. Poor sleep and rest cycles. Dehydration. What most of us don't realize is that when we're thirsty, we have actually already been operating at cellular dehydration, which when I think about it that way, it's kind of crazy what the human body can put itself through. Poor diet, whether that is not enough calories, too many calories, or not enough of the right calories. These can have impacts on our physical well-being. And then lack of physical activity. Now, when I see this as a cause, I kind of internally giggle. I used to be a bird keeper, and on any given day, I could cover 10 miles. And so when we're talking about physical exhaustion, your body gets used to the same physical exertion every single day. So if I'm doing 10 miles of work every single day, eventually my body is going to get used to that. And so when we're talking about lack of physical activity, I'm usually referring to physical activity outside of your normal work activity. Now, if you're someone who's used to be very physical and you're moving into a desk position or a position that spends a little bit more time sedentary, maybe you're standing behind a counter bringing guests in, or you're doing educational programs where you're not moving as much because you have an animal in your presence and you can't make a lot of movements. Eventually that can even wear on you. So just being cognizant that some of these causes aren't obvious as others are, okay? So that's a little bit about the physical. I want to jump into mental exhaustion. And as I've mentioned, for those that are just joining, we have a lot of content to go through. And so I am kind of moving some of these descriptions a little quickly. You will receive a recording of all of this, roughly 24 to 48 hours at the end of the webinar. So if you do have questions, I have Hannah and Aaron monitoring the chat for me. They'll get you those answers, and then we will have time at the end for some questions. So just throwing that out there if you feel like I'm moving through this quickly. I'm trying to get you as much as possible. All right, so with that said, mental exhaustion. This is defined when your brain feels overwhelmed by stimulus or has maintained an intense level of activity without rest for a long period of time. And we're looking at things like brain fog, which many of you mentioned in the chat, difficulty focusing or concentrating, mental numbness, and I know that one was mentioned as well, headaches and migraines, impaired decision-making. If you're really struggling to make good decisions or just make decisions in general, that can be a sign. Procrastinating or missing scheduled appointments or deadlines. Now, this one is always interesting to me because I sometimes am a self-claimed procrastinator by nature. But when I tend to procrastinate the most is when I am actually mentally exhausted. And so that's something to think about, that even if that's maybe a behavior that you've partook in for a long period of time, does it ebb and flow? And that can be that signal for you. And then emotionally disconnected, things that occur that normally you respond this way. Now you notice that you're either not responding or you're not responding the way that you normally do. Can be a sign of mental exhaustion. Ultimately, when we see these signs and symptoms, multiple ones or for extended periods of time, what we start to see then is chronic illness. This is where mental health symptoms start to show or have been showing, whether anxiety, depression, maybe even trauma is being experienced at this point. and then decreased resiliency occurs. So, you know, if you are someone like me who already struggles with anxiety and depression on a regular basis, when I'm mentally exhausted, those experiences and symptoms are even harder for me to utilize the tools that I've utilized for decades to work with those symptoms. It becomes twice as challenging. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Some of the things that we see cause this, and you'll hear some things that we discussed with physical. So you're going to start to see these things link together. So things like those long hours without rest or breaks. Thought rumination. Now, this is why thought rumination can be so impactful on our body. So for me, an example might be, I have an altercation with another colleague. Okay, maybe a barn didn't get cleaned the way I liked, or maybe we have a disagreement on what good welfare is for that animal. And, you know, you have hormones and chemicals in your brain that are released during that interaction, and you have adrenaline and cortisol and all those different things, right? Now you've walked away from that. You're in a barn cleaning and you're replaying the event over in your head. Your brain doesn't know that you are not actively in that event anymore. As far as your brain is concerned, you are right back into that altercation or right back in the middle of that incident. And so it starts kicking out those hormones and those chemicals that it kicked out just like when you were in that incident. And so basically what happens when you're thought ruminating over an event, something you said, something that happened, something that didn't happen, that something that could happen, you're basically overexerting your brain and your body. You are kicking out those hormones and those chemicals, and you're not giving your body time to recoup from those. And so that can cause that mental exhaustion. Decision overload. Has anybody walked down like the toothpaste aisle? There are hundreds of different types of toothpaste. I have 3 kids, so the cereal aisle is too much. There are just so many boxes of cereal. If you think about the fact that by the moment we get up in the morning, right, that alone is a decision to get out of bed and when to get out of bed, to the point where we put our head on the pillow, all the different decisions that our brain has to make. Some we are very obvious about, you know, when we have to make a decision on yes or no to how we're going to handle an animal situation, to the point where you maybe drive the same path every single day and you don't focus on those decisions as much. Or you walk into a dark room, you turn on a light. That's technically a decision. It's a reaction. And you get enough of those in the day and they can really start to wear on you. Okay. Providing care for a living being. I'm pretty confident that's the definition of most of our jobs, right? Whether it be an animal, other human beings. I mean, even if you have a family or loved ones or friends that you support or take care of, maybe it's the guests that come through your door or the students that you educate, right? In our industry, our animal care industry, we're constantly taking care of others in some form or another, and that can drain us. A demanding job. I don't think any of y'all need a definition for that one. Just put my job next to that statement, right? And then lack of work-life harmony. One of the things you'll notice as you get to know us at GRAZE and myself, I really try to refrain from using the term work-life balance. And the reason being, in my mind, when I think of balance, I think of things that are equal. And the reality is there are going to be different seasons in our life where we may be focused on one area more so than another. As I mentioned, I have kids and I just had my 3rd kid in January. So I am coming out of a season where all I focused on was my family for several weeks. And now I'm starting to focus on work again. And so I'm trying to find a harmony that I'm okay with. And my work-life harmony is going to look different from your work-life harmony. But it's got to be something that makes sense to you and that you have decided you're okay with. If you are not in alignment or you're lacking that work-life harmony, that's going to start to wear on you, predominantly in the mental standpoint, but also in emotional when we start to talk about that in just a second. Okay. So this is some of the signs and symptoms and some of the causes for mental exhaustion, which brings us to emotional exhaustion. And we can define this as navigating difficult, painful, or unwanted feelings for long periods of time. One of the things that I really want to impress upon anyone listening to this is that I try really hard not to identify emotions as positive or negative. The reason, again, words are really important to me, and how my brain processes words can be the key to how I interpret things. It also, I've noticed in others, have resonated that is how their brain works too. So every single emotion you have, and when we go through the signs and symptoms, you'll see this, is an indicator for you. And there are going to be incidences where a certain emotion, while uncomfortable, is extremely important. And there are going to be incidences where those very enjoyable emotions are going to be appropriate, or maybe flip that where they're not appropriate. But the only one who can identify that is really you. And so I focus on, instead of positive or negative, these are enjoyable or uncomfortable emotions, and do they fit? So some of the things that we notice when emotional exhaustion is at play is lingering anxiety. And anxiety is defined by worrying about something without an actual stimulus. And so I think, like for me right now, some of the events that have happened currently this week, I have a lot of anxiety around those. Okay. And that can happen in a variety of different ways. Persistent, sad, low, or hopeless feelings. Cynicism. You know, when you're really starting to find difficulty in caring for others, that can be a signal to you that maybe you're operating from a place of emotional exhaustion. Irritability or constant anger. Maybe difficulty processing and even managing emotions. I know those moments where you're going along through your day, you've had a really rough week or a really rough day, you're emotionally exhausted, and then you walk past that hose that's hanging up kinked and you lose it, right? I'm sure that's not happened to any of you ever. It has happened to me. And people just look at you confused, because while yes, nobody likes repairing and replacing hoses, it's not the end of the world. But in that moment, you're so exhausted that it feels like it. And so managing the emotions around something like that becomes very difficult. That sense of dread, you know, whether you're dreading a decision, whether you're dreading going to work or coming home, these can be signals to us. And if we experience these for long enough, that's where we start to see compassion fatigue, vicarious stress, feeling stuck in an emotion, or even struggling to identify emotions. And when we look at the causes of emotional exhaustion, you're going to start to see some trends, much like we talked about with physical and mental exhaustion. You're going to see things like thought rumination, poor diet, dehydration, lack of physical activity outside of your normal activity range, poor sleep and rest habits. But some other things that can impact and cause emotional exhaustion are experiencing grief, anger, loneliness, sadness, or other like emotions for repeatedly or extended periods of time. You know, I've cared for too many geriatric populations where you lose one individual. Yes, they're on the older side. In your brain, you can utilize your tools to work through that, but then another individual and another individual and another individual, or you have a virus or something that goes through the population. Another hard experience is, I know when we worked with flocks of birds to start breeding programs, especially with young new birds or with bird species that practice sibling side, you know, these can wear on you. And when you have them happen over and over again, you're going to start to experience that emotional exhaustion. And for many of you, that may be where you're at when you throw on some of the other incidences that are happening in our lives. a pandemic, avian influenza, what's going on in our world socially. That's a lot for us to process. That intense emotional experience, or even trauma, whether that's trauma that you experience personally or trauma that you vicariously observe in another living being, whether someone you care for or take care of, that can start to wear on you. And those are really prominent causes. What we often see is all three of these occurring simultaneously, and they tend to show up as cumulative stress or burnout, compassion fatigue, decreased resiliency, and even start to impact our health. You saw some of those symptoms or signs were muscle aches and soreness, migraines and headache, digestive issues. We start to see it show up in our health. Your joints and your muscles are really achy. You're really tired and lethargic. This then can impact your productivity. Maybe you're not getting what you would like to get done in the day because focusing on a single task is so challenging. It can impact our safety of us and those we work with. If you're struggling with brain fog and having troubles concentrating and you go to shift animals, there's a risk that maybe you shift animals together that aren't supposed to be, or you make other mistakes or incidences that could impact human safety as well as the animal safety, which then gets into animal welfare. If you're struggling with some of these signs and symptoms, or all of them, or a good chunk of them, you're more likely to forget things or not observe things. And that can wear on us in its own right. And so that's really why we want to talk a lot about these concepts. This is kind of heavy, and I want to start getting into the tools section. Before I do that, though, there's something that I want to bring to all of our awareness, because oftentimes what I see in those that I coach and that we see at GRAZE for those that we support is that I can give you all the tools, and many of the tools that I'm going to share with you today are probably tools you've heard of. However, there are societal beliefs that we hold and have been given that impact our ability to actually utilize these tools. And that's really what I want to talk about, is society's role in exhaustion. Now, when we started to switch to more of a capitalist business culture, if you will, we as a society, so this isn't just the zoo and aquarium industry, this isn't the animal care industry, this is as a society. And when I say society, I am referring mostly to the United States, knowing that some of you are joining us from other places. But in general, we started to prioritize productivity and profit over the human being. And so organizations that used to employ every single role, whether that be, and some of you still do depending on the size of your organization. But I know I've worked with organizations where the janitorial staff, the HR staff, the cleaning staff are all contracted in, right? So that we have more money to spend on the animals and the spaces and the people working with them. This is true for a lot of the organizations in our society. They started to contract work out. I mean, look at things like Grubhub, Uber, right? We're contracting other people to do jobs that normally would have belonged to a total organization. And that contract labor has had a profound impact on the messaging that the new workforce has been getting since they were very young. I identify as an older millennial, and I can tell you from personal experience that the message that I always got was do really good in school. And by doing good in school, that means good grades, maybe a lot of either sports or academics, extracurricular activities, those kind of things, so that you can get into a good college and you can get a good job, and you can secure your space in the middle class. And so when you think about it, one of the most prominent statistics that Gallup ever put out was that over 76% of the current workforce will experience burnout in some point in time in their career, most of them in the very beginning of their career. And a lot of that has to do with this message that's been sent out that if you work really hard, right, you can achieve great success. And so we are all working our butts off. And as a result, we're exhausted. And in a way, we wear this exhaustion as a badge of honor. How many times have you ever talked to somebody and they're like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I am so busy, right? I'm just so tired. I'm so busy. I have all these things. You know, when you look at some of these schedules for like kids and things like that, it's crazy. You think about some of the tasks that we are trying to achieve. Many of our organizations have gone through massive staffing changes, either individuals leaving the industry, or maybe you had to cut back, your organization had to cut back on positions. And so now we're trying to catch back up. And so people have been taking on all these different responsibilities, and we're either not able to or haven't started to replace those individuals. And that's then when we start to judge others for their productivity level. You know, this idea where maybe I've gone into a barn and I'm like, seriously, the person before me couldn't take a few extra minutes to grab that bag of parakeet food and fill the container. Now I have to go take extra steps. Or I've gone to lunch, I've gone a little late, and everybody else is finishing up their lunch. You know, you're just like, now you start to judge others for their productivity level in order to make you feel a little bit better about how much you've gotten done and how exhausted you are. And this idea of perfectionism, we're working with animals, and yes, we should provide the highest standard of care we possibly can. But at the same time, I mean, you all saw it. If you got your email, you saw I made a mistake. I did not get you the appropriate link. And I know that that is not a fair assessment when we're comparing it to an animal life. But the reality is we're going to make mistakes. Our colleagues are going to make mistakes. You know, hopefully they're small mistakes like hanging the hose up kinked, and they're not something with bigger repercussions. But when you put so much emphasis on being perfect, you either aren't going to do things, or when you do that, make a small mistake, it's going to reverberate and you're going to put so much pressure on you, you're actually more likely to make more mistakes. And if you're exhausted from trying to be perfect, you can start to see that spiral. The biggest thing here is this idea that our value and worth comes from doing rather than being. Look at all the things I've gotten done. You know, at the end of the day, I can tick all my boxes on my list. But did I enjoy the work? Or vice versa, you know, for me as a mom, I'm at work, I'm thinking about my kids. I'm with my kids, I'm thinking about my work, right? So rather than being in that moment, I'm focused on what I'm not doing. Or it could look something like, you know, it's your day off and you're checking your email, because if something happens, you need to be available. You know, really looking at, am I doing this because I want others to see how hard I'm working or be valued for what I'm doing? Or am I experiencing the moment? The same can be for an animal loss. How many of us, I know I've done this, where you've experienced a traumatic loss of an animal or even a quality of life decision. And instead of taking that moment to be in that moment, you're immediately jumping to all the other animals you have to take care of. You're immediately going back into other barns and starting to take care of the other animals instead of being in that moment. And so that's something that's really important when we're going into these tools that I'm going to start discussing with you now. I want you, when you're thinking about some of these tools, really think about, maybe I've heard this tool before. Why hasn't it been helpful for me? Or I really want to utilize this tool more. What are the obstacles or challenges that I might be holding on to that aren't even mine? And then how can I support those around me? If you're in a leadership position, or I personally, and you know, GRAZE in general, we believe that you're a leader at all levels. So even if it's your first day in the industry, you can still be a leader. So how do you show up in a way that does not continue wearing exhaustion as a badge, and recognizing that exhaustion isn't how it's not normal, or it's not, it is too common, and we need to start to address it. if that all makes sense to y'all. Okay. Heavy. Let's all just take a deep breath and start to go into the tools. So we all know most of us are probably exhausted, or at least you've been exhausted at some point in time. And you can see where some of these symptoms are coming to play, some of the signs and things like that. So let's talk about how we start to become energized. What are some of the tools that we can use every single day to start build that energy? Now, keep in mind when I'm sharing these tools with you, you have probably been building to exhaustion or been in exhaustion for a really long time. So none of these are magic tools that are going to bring you relief immediately, or they might, but it won't be long-term. This is talking about changing your habits, changing your practices, changing your every single day for a long-term benefit. So I just want to throw that out there. So y'all aren't expecting anything magical from me, but these tools are really important. So things like self-husbandry, also known as self-care, rest, and we're going to dive deeper into these, so don't worry, processing thoughts and emotions, and boundaries. Okay, and we're going to touch on each one of these. So when we look, really quick, I want you all to throw in the chat, when I say self-care, what comes to mind?
So I have, hopefully you can hear me, habits that help us focus on process. Sorry, it's moving fast. Not the destination. My dogs, alone time, hiking, alone time, me time, taking time for myself, a facial, going on a trip somewhere exotic, relaxation, time outside of work for yourself and hobbies, nature, bubble baths, spa trips, Friends Day, non-work activities, yoga, taking a bath instead of a shower, kayaking, proper sleep, good diet, exercise, setting time for hobbies, team hurdle.
Awesome. Yes. So everything you all have listed is a version of self-care. And how I love to approach self-care is really from the perspective of this is my basic husbandry. All right. Oftentimes the challenges that we see and experience with practicing self-care or self-husbandry is this idea that we're supposed to take care of everybody else. We're supposed to be there for everyone else, the animals. You know, I need to make sure all these animals are clean and fed and watered, make sure that if an animal, like in the middle of a medical emergency, you're not probably going to stop to eat lunch. Yes, but that doesn't mean you completely surpass it altogether and forget about it, right? We need to take care of ourselves in order to have the energy to get through those really hard, exhausting times. And the way I like to break it down for me is the opportunities to thrive, because that is the animal welfare assessment tools I'm used to using. And so hopefully some of you, the opportunities to thrive resonate. If not, the 5 freedoms are another good way to frame your basic husbandry or your self-husbandry care. And so that sometimes helps us with how we can utilize those tools. So idea like the well-balanced diet. You know, are you eating foods that are going to support you? What is a good diet for you? And that can look different for everyone depending on your, sensitivities or your food choices or even your beliefs that can be impacted. But at the end of the day, are you eating food that actually fuels you? Are you drinking plenty of water? One of the things for me, and Erin and Hannah can attest to this, I love my coffee. I have been drinking coffee since I was in high school. It was a rite of passage in my household. One of the things though that's really important to me is drinking enough water. And so while my coffee pot is brewing, I have a glass that I set next to it every single night, and I fill it up with water, and I drink at least 10 to 20 ounces of water before I pour myself a cup of coffee. And so that's just how I start myself on the right foot at the beginning of the day. So really making sure that I'm getting enough of that water for me. The same with my food. Am I keeping healthy foods in the house or keeping foods that are going to benefit me in arm's reach when I know I'm tired? Self-maintaining. So, these can be things like keeping a roof over your head. Do you have financial security, and what does that look like for you? Do you have, cleanliness? Are you keeping a cluttered space, or are you keeping an organized space? Are you seeking personal or professional development opportunities, ways to learn and grow, other ways that you can maintain yourself, right? So this can be a variety of different things. Species specific behavior, we're primates, right? So building those relationships that are important to you in those support systems. Optimal health. Are you taking time to rest? Are you taking time to move your body? Go to the doctor, stay home when you're sick, all those different things. And then choice and control. We're going to break these last two out a little bit deeper. But when I'm talking about choice and control, really looking at your habits and your routines, looking at your boundaries, looking at the thoughts and that you let go through your brain. Are you choosing them, or are you just letting them happen? Okay. So when we break these out and we talk about rest, the first thing I always talk about is sleep. And that's not always everyone's favorite. The National Institute of Sleep Health does recommend 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. As I told you earlier, I have a 4-month-old. We all know, right? I am not getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. That is just the season I'm in. So there are other ways we can support ourselves. And it's really important that we do rest, because one of the things that I always like to point out to people is that when you've been awake for 20 plus hours, right? So we're looking at 4 hours or less of sleep, you are cognitively functioning at the same level of someone who's legally drunk. So sleep is really important. But if you're in a season like me, or maybe you're not getting enough sleep, there are other things that you can do, because one of the things we found was that even the 45% of the people who are getting that 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night, because of all the other things going on in their lives, they still wake up 1 to 3 times a week exhausted, right? So sleep's not the be all end all. So this is where we're going to talk about physical and mental rest. And what do I mean by that? So taking time to actually go on those fun, exotic vacations that Jill talked about, or even maybe it's just taking a day from work, or a day from fill in the blank, okay? Staying home when you don't feel well. Throughout your day, taking frequent breaks. If you're constantly bouncing from barn to barn to barn, exhibit, holding, guest interaction, training, enrichment, and diet, going back and forth, just taking a minute in between some of those tasks, or 30 seconds, can have a profound impact on how your body feels. All right. So if, you find yourself ruminating on a lot of thoughts, taking time to, just rest for a second. I can control my thoughts, and we'll talk about some of those techniques here in just a minute. Another thing you can do is sensory breaks. We have so many things coming at us. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a building where there's like guineas going off and cranes and macaws. And then you've got the radio going, and then my phone is dinging because my manager realized we had a team meeting today and wanted to send us the location of the meeting. Or maybe I'm like, oh, there's my alarm letting me know I have that keeper chat in just a few minutes, or, whatever that looks like, right? So finding time in your day, whether that's the moment you get in your car before you hit the road and get traffic, or maybe that's as soon as you get home, those first few minutes before you take care of whatever menagerie of animals you have for your fur, scaled or feathered kids. And just taking that moment to just disconnect from the phone and the noises, the radio, the TV, whatever it is. Those can impact and act as a form of rest, and can be just as impactful as, some of our sleep habits. Another one I really like to talk about is single tasking. So Dr. Amish Yah talks about how our focus is actually like a flashlight. All right. Many of us, myself included, believe that we can multitask. And what they've discovered when they've done MRIs and CAT scans and things on the brain and studied the neurology is that we're not actually multitasking. We are task switching. So I want you to think about that for just a second. When you are doing, as I said, where you're in the building, you're hosing, you're scrubbing, you're observing, you're checking your phone, you're listening to the radio, you're watching the guests. That's a lot of tasks. It's no wonder our brains are tired. It's no wonder our bodies are tired, right? So recognizing that multitasking is not always beneficial. And when you can, really do try to single task. The last one I'm going to share with you on the rest is this idea of tapping into our parasympathetic nervous system. So this is our rest and digest system. You have your fight and flight, your rest and digest. One of the ways that you can tap into this throughout the day, it doesn't take a lot of time, is through breath work. And my personal favorite, because it's super easy, is the box breath. Literally what you do is you pick a number between 3 and 8, depending on your respiratory desires, okay? And this is what it looks like. You breathe in, you inhale for a count, let's say 5. You inhale for a count of 5. You hold that breath for a count of 5. You exhale for a count of 5. You hold that for a count of 5. And then you do it again. Doing that 3 to 5 times, even if you're going into a difficult meeting, you're coming out of a difficult meeting, you're moving between barns. Maybe you've gone from a medical emergency and now you have to get back to a keeper chat. Okay, taking a few seconds to just tap into your parasympathetic nervous system can actually make a huge difference in how your body feels afterwards. So these are some tools you can use to rest your body and even your mind. With that said, I want to talk about processing thoughts and emotions. So the National Science Foundation reported back in like 2005 that we experience anywhere between 50,000 and 80,000 thoughts a day. And there's some really new research that's come out of Canada, out of Queen's University, that looks at thought transitions. And so roughly every 6 minutes, we experience a thought transition because thoughts are generally grouped together. And so about 6,200 a day is what they kind of estimate you may be transitioning thoughts. Regardless of those numbers, that's a lot of processing. Okay. And something else they've found and confirmed in these various different studies is that 80% of our thoughts are in a negative bias. And that's because of survival. Our brains are constantly looking for things that could harm us. And so we tend to lean toward the negative thoughts. With that said, it takes roughly 1 to 2 seconds for a negative thought to embed in your brain. It takes up to 10 seconds for a positive thought to embed in your brain. And on a ratio, it takes 5 positive experiences to negate 1 negative experience. So I want you to think about that ratio in our brains. So when we're talking about processing our thoughts and emotions, it really is starting to bring awareness to our thoughts. And the ways that we can do this is through meditation. And I'm not talking about sitting still for 30 minutes without a thought. No, I'm talking about meditation in a way where you look at each thought as a rep. You're really just bringing awareness. Oop, there's a thought. Oh, hey, there's another thought. Oh, there's another one. Because when you start to get into those thought rumination patterns, right? Meditation is a tool that you can start to utilize and go, oh, hey, I'm in a loop, or I'm really ruminating on that. That's interesting. And you can start then to bring yourself into the present moment of being and that mindfulness. So while you're scrubbing the floor or filling up the pool, instead of letting your mind wander about what happened previously before that space or what is going to happen a little bit later, are you present? A really good place I like to practice this is when I'm eating, really actually tasting the food, feeling the texture, and start to practice those skills. Journaling is another way, we can, there's all kinds of different journals out there. You can gratitude, you can do like thought downloads where you just write down everything, stream of consciousness, any way that you can utilize that for bringing awareness to your thoughts and your emotions, not as a way to shame or guilt or judge yourself. Really is a way to just say, hey, here is what's going on in my brain. Is this what I want to choose? Which goes into practicing neuroplasticity. I can say that word. So neuroplasticity is the ability to modify, change, or adapt both structure and function of our thought life in response to experience. And I like to think of this as ABCs. So first, you need to gain the awareness. What thoughts or emotions am I having or experiencing? Am I in thought rumination? Am I stuck in an emotion? What am I experiencing? And do I know why? Okay, then be proactive. Start to make the decision about what thoughts or emotions are actually going to serve you in this moment. And maybe what you're thinking and experiencing is serving you. Awesome. If it's not, or you recognize that you're now in a space where you need to actually move through the thought or emotion, this is where you can just start to decide what's that look like. And then finally choose what is the thought, what is the emotion that's going to serve me best here? And then how am I going to actually implement that? Okay. And then last but not least, I know we're getting there on time, so I want to make sure we cover this. Boundaries. All right. We talked about what society is kind of, our exhaustion is a badge. And, this cycle of being exhausted, not being able to actually come out of it before the next event or something happens. And as we're starting to practice more self-husbandry and basic self-care, as we're starting to find space for rest and better habits around rest, and as we are starting to bring ourselves more mindfulness on our daily activities, what we're thinking, how we're feeling, boundaries are a really good way to start to meld that and protect that space. And so the first thing you want to really do is, when we're looking at this, I'm coming at a space of personal boundaries. So if you've been hired for a certain job description, and this is what the crazy job description has, you kind of knew that going into it. All right. So we're talking about personal boundaries here as a good place to start. Once you master that skill, then you work into other areas of your life. Okay, but first you're going to do is recognize what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to you. What do you value? What's important to you? What are your priorities? And a quick example that I use is family has always been important to me. However, at the beginning of 2020, before we knew what COVID or anything was, my 8-month-old son was hospitalized with what was described at that time as a super respiratory virus. I have some thoughts, but that was the tools they had at the time. That's what they said. And he was on oxygen. He actually, when I took him to urgent care that morning for his breathing and his coughing, he actually stopped breathing in urgent care and was rushed by ambulance to the hospital, where we spent 4 days in PICU. And for me, that experience moved the value of family much higher on my value list. And colleagues commented on how my behavior started to change. My boundaries around my family time started to change. I was less likely to send or answer emails after hours. I started to get very clear on when people needed to contact me in regards to animal issues. And I started to actually follow through with those. And so we can have those experiences in our lives, or if you've established that this is truly important to me, here's the boundary I want to set. That's where we start. Because if you don't know what's important and what you value, it's really hard to set those boundaries. And what that then looks like is basically what you're telling other people is, if this happens, here's how I'm going to respond. So for example, if you have a colleague who gets really upset very quickly, maybe it's something like, hey, I understand that our job is hard. When you yell at me, I'm going to start to walk away. When you text me after hours, I may not respond because I'm with my family. Or if it's a guest that comes up to you just totally off their rocker, you can look at them and say, I understand that you're frustrated. However, We can't solve this while you're yelling at me. So when you're ready to calm down, I would love to assist you. All right. Other ways that these boundaries show up is by respectfully saying no. And as I mentioned, for many of us, our organizations who have gone through huge changes. And so as a result, maybe we are short-staffed. Maybe you do have a lot of things on your plate, and adding one more task seems really, really challenging. And so some of the ways that we can do these boundaries is, let's say a colleague calls you on the radio and says, hey, I need help disinfecting this barn. Normally, even if you're in the middle of a task, you immediately drop what you do and you go to help them, okay? How you can start to transition and respect those boundaries is, I do want to help you. Let me finish my task first. As soon as I'm done, I will check in with you, and then I will see if I can still help you, all right? You're respectfully protecting your boundaries. Another way this might show up is, let's say you're in a manager or leadership position, or you're a primary trainer on an animal, and you get a phone call on your weekend, but you're not the manager on duty, or you're not the person who's supposed to be on site. One of the things, because I know I'm guilty of, I would be like, oh, how can I help you? And what I started to do was, hey, that sounds really important. So-and-so is the manager on duty. Contact them first. If they can't help you, then I'll see how I can support you. You know, you're starting to ease into those boundaries and respect them. The last thing that I see a lot, and I've experienced, is when your plate's full and someone gives you more tasks, right? Can you do this? Can you add this? One of the things that I do is I keep my calendar on my phone, and I literally put everything in my calendar. When I'm going to eat, when I'm going to go pick up the kids, when I'm going to work on this project, this task, meet with this person, right? So then when that happens, I can say, okay, what you're telling me is really important. Here's how my day or my week looks. Is there a priority on here that you would like me to postpone or swap out so that I can accomplish this task? Or depending on the situation, if it's a personal or whatnot, maybe it's just that, no, I can't work this weekend, I'm sorry, and move on. You know, don't beat yourself up for that. You are starting to hold space and respect who you are, and you are starting to give yourself that space to practice those tools that are actually going to move you from being exhausted to energized. Okay, last but not least, ask for help. Okay, some of these tools that I've shared for you seem very simple, but if you are at the point where you are in that extreme exhaustion, whether that's physical, mental, or emotional, asking for support is the best way that you're going to get through that. And I do have a list of resources, so I'll give you a few seconds to take a picture of this one. I have one more slide of resources. Obviously, you can always check out our website. We have various different individual and team and organizational support that we can offer. As I mentioned, we are trained in critical incident responses. There are also other places that you can look. Your employee assistance programs. Most organizations have one that are highly underutilized. And there are various reasons for that, but I really encourage you to reach out, because that could be a free service to you that gets you support immediately. And oftentimes they can help you with everything from budgeting and taxes to finding a good counselor or therapist, right? Marriage, individual, parent, all of that types, wills, just all kinds of different things, you know, so look for that. Look for support groups in your area. Hopefully people got that picture. And I'm going to jump for this one. If you're in extreme crisis, you know, there are people you can reach out to help you get to a point where you can actually start utilizing the tools that I've shared with you today. For some of you, there may be you or those near you that you love or care about that are in that extreme exhaustion phase, and these are real issues for them that they need to get addressed first before you can tell them to journal, before you can tell them to get more sleep. Okay, so I just want to recognize that the tools I shared today are really for those who are exhausted, but not necessarily in that extreme exhaustion. So these are the tools that are going to help in those cases. Okay. One last thing I want to really quick touch on before we open up for questions, and I thank you for everyone's, we're right at time. So we have some upcoming trainings. If you want to learn how to help others a little bit more, we have our mental health first aid course that's coming up June 6th. Registration for that does close on May 30th, and that's so that we can get you the book and the registration links and the content in plenty of time. We also have our Assisting Individuals in Crisis course, which is a 2-day training. And what that really does is these two courses help you identify when others need support and what kind of resources and support you can provide and what kind of resources and support you can direct them towards. Okay. And again, that registration actually closes on June 6th, and that is the link. I think Erin or Hannah can probably pop that link into the chat for you. You could also find that on our website. We do ask that you fill out the pre-registration intake form because we do want to make sure that as we are getting people in our industry trained to help and support others, that we really are recognizing our industry and utilizing peers from our industry. So we do kind of go through a pre-registration just to make sure that we're not getting someone off the streets who wants to learn this, that we're first serving the animal care industry, okay? And then if you receive this email, the email with this link, or you will get the email with the recording, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter that will give you updates on our different blog posts, our upcoming trainings, and additional resources. Okay, I threw a lot at you. It's been an hour, but I will open up space for questions. So I am going to leave this up for just a little bit. Erin, do you want to see if there's any questions or if somebody wants to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, real quick, hopefully you can hear me okay. We had someone say or ask, what can be done when your upper management does not respect the boundaries that you put in place? One of the thoughts I had was speaking to something that PJ had mentioned in the chat is, for me, I try to look at, and this may not work every time, but really thinking of things from an animal behavior standpoint. So, you know, we inadvertently condition behaviors in people around us that then create these expectations of things that we need to accomplish, tasks we're able to do, how much we're able to handle, basically. And perhaps now wanting to set boundaries, going again from 0 to 100 is going to create a lot of frustration. If you think of, you're trying to train an animal and now all of a sudden you're asking them to do something different or in a different way, they're going to get frustrated with you and not really understand what you mean. So trying to come at it from that aspect is what I usually try to do. And what are those small approximations where, yes, I want to create this boundary. These are my goals for my boundaries, but what are those small approximations to get me there? So even if it's just one a week that I'm able to say no to, and then slowly work on building on that, you're going to start conditioning a different behavior and a different response from those people around you. So that's kind of my take on that. And then Shannon, I'll let you answer that question, of course, as well.
Yes, and I think you did it perfectly. And for me, one of my small approximations was that calendar app and putting in the different activities that I was doing because many of the people that I worked with were very visual. Like me just telling them I don't have time for that, they kind of blew it off. And some of that too, when we talk about that societal impact, they're exhausted too. Chances are they're also exhausted and they've been operating that way. So they're not in a space where they understand why, well, I'm exhausted, everybody else should be exhausted too. Okay. And so when you can start with those small approximations, so if it's upper management, that's why I always say respectfully saying no. And you really do come at it as, okay, here's what my day looks like. Here are the things that I have prioritized as important. Do you prioritize these the same way? If not, what are some tasks that you feel are more important? Or maybe there's something that's taking you 45 minutes and in their mind, it should only take 30. Why is there a time discrepancy? And start to open that communication up. And sometimes it's a very uncomfortable conversation to start. But when we avoid the conversation or when we expect them to act a certain way without giving, think about it. We've all taken care of animals. And when there's an animal husbandry manual to go with it, and you see a really odd behavior and you're like, oh, is that normal? You can either look in the husbandry manual or you can reach out on a listserv or more experienced colleagues to find out, yes, this is normal. No, this isn't normal. The same when we look at our upper management or other individuals, is it taking me 30 minutes for this reason where you haven't done it? And I had a keeper one time look at me and go, you realize you haven't cleaned this barn in 3 years. We've changed a few things. And I was like, solid point. And so that's where I was invited. She was very intelligent. She invited me down to the barn to help clean. And I was like, yes, let me come with you and see what has changed, right? But sometimes starting that conversation can be awkward and uncomfortable, but that really is the most important first step before you can really start to push those boundaries and respect, and finally, if you've done all that and they still don't want to, that's a decision where you really have to look, am I okay with that or not? And what choices do I want to make as a result of that? Okay. Hopefully that answered it.
Yeah. So Peggy, to answer your question, yes. So the question was, or the statement in question, they're looking at implementing a life coach benefit for their employees, for the employees to have a place to take some of the issues that they may be facing, and asked if this is something that our company does provide. So Shannon is, and she can probably speak to it a little bit more. She is a certified life coach. And then we do, we're doing a lot with what we'll call peer-led support. So we've found, again, one of the reasons that GRAZE exists is many of our experiences throughout our careers have led us to really identify that the people within this industry and the peers within this industry really understand us the most, right? I've heard throughout my whole career, people from the outside don't get it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't utilize sources from the outside, because 100% we should, but we can offer potentially that time and space with a peer who may understand even what a shoot is or shifting is and things like that, that might be just exhausting to have to explain to somebody who's not in the industry. And so we can offer that peer-led support as well as, that certified coaching as well. And so we've found that has seemed to be quite beneficial for people to be able to talk to somebody who does understand what they're saying, and recognize that we are not licensed professionals in mental health. We are peers within the industry that seem to understand, and we do have boundaries and training that helps us identify when somebody does need beyond peer support or beyond coaching. And then we were able to help connect them with those resources.
And that's part of the reason why we also work with our licensed clinical social worker, is because when we do have individuals that we identify as being beyond the training that we have received, then we can align them with that next level of support. And that's really important. But yes, so I am a licensed clinical social worker, or no, Cindy's a licensed clinical. This is how, see, now I'm tired, y'all. I am a certified life coach. And so, yes, our organization offers coaching and the peer support, the trained peer-led support. And if you go onto our website, you can connect with us, or if you email us at that GRAZE@zoomentalhealthsupport.com, we can get you more of that information and connect with you that way. And that's for individuals too. If you're like, hey, I could use some additional support, reach out to us and we can set you up.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is always meeting people where they're at. So again, just using that, those experiences within the industry that, someone has, and be able to help each other. And I think, what we're trying to do is grow that network so that other peers in the industry, it's not just us three, are able to help support each other, because again, we're caring individuals. So the more that we can help others care for other people, I think fills a niche that we all really want to do every day. So next question, what about when somebody has been exhausted for so long that they just don't know what it's like to not be exhausted?
That's where that additional ask for help. Our body, just like, you get into a routine. And when you're so used to not feeling okay, that feeling okay feels so foreign and uncomfortable. And honestly, in my opinion, that's where you need someone else helping support you, whether that's a counselor, a coach, a therapist, a psychologist, a doctor, a really good friend, whoever that needs to be, because those are going to be the approximations. You're going to need someone else to help you. I don't encourage you to go at it alone. And so if you recognize either in yourself or someone you care about, start that conversation of, I recognize in myself that I am to a point of exhaustion that I don't even know what good feels like anymore. What resources, and you'll get this in the recording, and you saw the last page. If I need to, I can go back to those pages. What resource do I need to tap into to start getting the support I need to work back towards good, feeling good? Or, hey, I've noticed that you seem really, tired or worn out. You want to talk about it? Wow, that feels really heavy and stressful. Would you be open to getting some additional support? I'll go with you. Do you want me to call someone and we can go together? Doing things like that can be really impactful. That first awareness, though, is huge.
Any other questions? Again, you can either put them in the chat, message me privately if you want it to be anonymous, of course. And then we're also willing and able to have you come on camera and unmute. I know many in the animal care industry tend to not like the spotlight. So as much as it may surprise you, I know Shannon tends to be a little bit shyer. So
I'm actually an introvert, y'all.
Yes. So again, we know that this is not an end all be all, right? This is not a quick fix for anything. Nothing that we do, unfortunately, in regards to mental health support is a quick fix. I really wish it was. I also really wish we didn't have to have this in existence now. But, this is, again, that started that conversation. We're hoping to offer more webinars in times and spaces that are, of course, free to people. And then, for individuals or institutions to have access to as well. So we appreciate everybody's time, and we are here. We'll stay on for a few more minutes too, because I know some people want to just ask something a little more privately. But of course, you can feel free to email us as well. So I'll just stay on for a few more minutes.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.